We live in a world that is profoundly, obsessively loud. From the moment we wake up, we are bombarded by a relentless chorus of voices, all desperate for a single, fleeting moment of attention. We are told from a young age that to be powerful, we must speak with absolute authority. We are conditioned to believe that the person who controls the room is the one with the loudest voice, the sharpest wit, or the most unyielding argument. This cultural obsession has created a fascinating psychological phenomenon, a society filled with people who are frantically preparing their next monologue while pretending to pay attention to yours. Most human conversations are not true exchanges of ideas. They are merely two competing monologues, occasionally interrupted by an impatient nod. But beneath this chaotic surface lies a deep. Dale Carnegie recognized this profound paradox long before the advent of modern social media and the Artusus hour noise cycle. He understood that human beings are driven by a burning, near insatiable desire to be heard, to be validated, and to feel deeply important. Yet, because everyone is so aggressively consumed by their own performance, this fundamental human need is almost never met. When you step out of this exhausting race for attention and deliberately dot master the art of what can only be described as hypnotic listening, you instantly gain a staggering psychological. You stop chasing influence and instead allow it to flow toward you naturally. By remaining completely present, highly attentive, and strategically silent, you create a powerful psychological vacuum. The other person's ego will instinctively rush to fill that vacuum, causing them to lower their guard, reveal their true motives, and hand you the steering wheel of the dynamic without ever realizing they have surrendered it. Okay? To understand the mechanics of the hypnotic listener, you must first dismantle the illusion of eloquence. Think about the last time you left an interaction feeling completely captivated by someone. If you carefully dissect that memory, you will often find a stunning reality. You did 80% of the talking. The other person didn't dazzle you with brilliant stories or complex theories. Instead, they gave you the rare gift of their undivided attention. They made you feel brilliant. Dale Carnegie famously told the story of an evening where he met a distinguished botanist at a dinner party. Carnegie, knowing absolutely nothing about botany, sat completely fascinated, listening for hours as the scientist passionately explained exotic plants and indoor gardens. At the end of the evening, the botanist turned to the host and described Carnegie as a most stimulating conversationalist. Carnegie had barely spoken a word. He had simply mastered the art of listening with genuine, intense focus. This is not a passive act of submission, it is a highly active, strategic execution of social intelligence. So, when you listen hypnotically, you are not merely waiting for your turn to speak. You are actively scanning the other person's emotional landscape. You are tracking the subtle fluctuations in their vocal pitch, watching the alignment of their shoulders, your theirs, and identifying the hidden anxieties and desires beneath their spoken words. Every story they tell, every complaint they lodge, and every boast they make is a map outlining exactly how they want to be perceived by the world. By granting them the space to unfold this map completely undisturbed, you are subtly shifting the power balance of the conversation. The speaker becomes emotionally dependent on your validation, constantly looking to your face for the social cues that confirm their worth. You become the quiet anchor of the room, controlling the emotional frequency of the interaction without uttering a single sentence. And most people fail to influence others because they rely entirely on the fragile force of logic. They present facts, they build ironclad arguments, and they push their points aggressively across the table. But human beings are not creatures of logic. We are creatures of deep emotion, bristling with prejudices and motivated entirely by pride and vanity. When you argue with someone, their psychological defenses immediately lock into place. Their brain treats your words as a direct threat to their status, rendering them completely incapable of changing their mind. The hypnotic listener bypasses this entire defense system. By listening with profound empathy, you disarm their evolutionary survival instincts. You create an environment of absolute psychological safety where their ego can rest. And once the ego is at rest, the mind becomes remarkably fluid, open to suggestion, and ready to be guided exactly where you want it to go. By remaining completely present, highly attentive, and strategically silent, you create a powerful psychological vacuum that forces others to lower their guard. The true weapon of the hypnotic listener is the calculated, deliberate use of strategic silence. For, to the untrained mind, silence is incredibly uncomfortable. In our fast paced society, a pause in conversation feels like a failure, a sudden drop in momentum that must be aggressively corrected with filler words, nervous laughter, or a completely new topic. We are conditioned to rush into every conversational gap, desperate to keep the air moving. But a master of human behavior views that empty space not as a failure, but as a vacuum of immense psychological pressure. When you intentionally refuse to fill a pause, when you simply maintain steady, relaxed eye contact and allow the silence to stretch for a beat or two longer than normal, you trigger an involuntary survival mechanism in the other person's subconscious mind. Okay. This mechanism is rooted in our evolutionary past. In human tribes, an unresolved silence from an interlocutor signaled tension, judgment, or an unvoiced threat. In modern social interactions, this ancient anxiety manifests as a desperate need to gain approval and relieve the pressure. When you introduce a strategic pause after someone finishes speaking, their brain instantly panics. They begin to wonder, did I say something wrong? Did I reveal too much? Do they agree with me? To break this agonizing tension, they will almost always keep talking. They will expand on their previous point, justify their position, and begin to share deeper, more guarded information that they never originally intended to reveal. They will literally talk themselves into a corner, exposing their vulnerabilities, their true motives, and the exact levers of influence you need to guide them. King Dale Carnegie closely studied the behavior of the world's most successful leaders and negotiators, sub six, and he observed that they all possessed an extraordinary tolerance for conversational silence. They didn't feel the need to constantly assert their presence or validate themselves by speaking. Think about the operational style of a high level investigator or a world class corporate diplomat. When they ask a critical question, they don't interrupt the answer and they don't immediately jump in with a follow up. Um, they listen to the response and then they hold the space. They let the echo of the other person's words sit in the air. This active psychological space forces the speaker to look inward, confronted by the raw weight of their own statements. Under the weight of that silence, the superficial masks of social pleasantry begin to crack, and the real human being underneath is forced to show their hand. Okay? To execute this level of control, you must learn to govern your own biological impulses. When the conversation pauses, your own nervous system will urge you to speak, to nod frantically, or to offer reassuring filler sounds like uh-huh or right. You must override this reflex with absolute physical stillness. Keep your posture relaxed but completely engaged. Tilt your head slightly to signal deep, analytical interest, and maintain a calm, unblinking gaze. By doing this, you communicate immense status and unshakable confidence. You signal to the room that you are entirely comfortable in your own skin, completely unfazed by the lack of noise, and in total control of your emotional state. The contrast between your absolute calm and the other person's dot frantic need to fill the air completely rewrites the power dynamic. You are no longer participating in a casual chat. You're conducting a psychological symphony. This technique is incredibly effective when dealing with high ego individuals, negotiators, or people who are actively trying to deceive you. A liar or an aggressive posturer relies heavily on your immediate reaction to gauge the success of their performance. If they make a bold, exaggerated claim and you respond with immediate argument or validation, you give them the feedback they need to calibrate their next move. But if you meet their performance with a long, steady, silent gaze, their confidence collapses. They realize their tricks are falling flat against an invisible barrier, forcing them to overcorrect, stutter, or retreat into a more honest, compliant posture. You have controlled the entire trajectory of the interaction without committing a single word of your own to the record. Ken, under the weight of that unyielding silence, the superficial masks of social pleasantry begin to crack, forcing the real human being to show their hand, while silence is the invisible weight that cracks the superficial mask. It is not entirely sufficient on its own. Silence deployed without an anchor of warmth is not hypnotic. It is terrifying. It devolves into clinical interrogation, a cold and calculated stare down that forces the other person into a state of acute defensive paralysis. To truly command the dynamic of any room, your silence must be paired with an intense, almost overwhelming aura. Dale Carnegie articulated this brilliantly when he established one of his most fundamental laws of human relations. You must become genuinely interested in other people. However, in the high stakes realm of absolute influence, this is not merely a polite, gentle suggestion for making friends. It is an aggressive, tactical deployment of emotional resonance designed to permanently disarm the brain's deepest survival systems. You are not just hearing their spoken words, you are actively engineering a neurological sanctuary where it is completely safe for dot them to drop their heavy armor and surrender to your influence. The architecture of this invisible sanctuary is constructed entirely through your physical presence. When an individual speaks, especially regarding a topic they are deeply passionate or profoundly insecure about, their brain is operating on two entirely separate tracks. The conscious track is busy formulating the narrative, but the subconscious track is frantically scanning your face, your posture, and your micro movements for any sign of judgment. If they detect even the slightest hint of a condescending smirk, a furrowed brow of disagreement, or a restless tap of your fingers, the psychological vault slams shut instantly. But if they look at you and see the absolute open frame, a relaxed, grounded posture, uncrossed arms, a slight leaning forward of the torso, and eyes that reflect their own emotional intensity without wavering, something magnificent happens within their biology. Their mirror neurons begin to fire in rapid succession. They feel an intoxicating, overwhelming rush of validation, realizing that for the first time in perhaps a very long time, another human being is entirely present with them, unburdened by ego or distraction. Okay, this brings us to the greatest, most destructive misconception in the art of persuasion, the dangerous, ego driven belief that to validate someone, you must logically agree with them. This is the exact trap that destroys most amateur negotiators and eager debaters. They hear an opinion they vehemently oppose, and their fragile ego forces them to instantly correct the record, shattering the connection into 1,000 unrecoverable pieces. A truly hypnotic listener, trained in the depths of Carnegie psychology, operates on a much higher, almost untouchable plane of social intelligence. They understand that you can absolutely validate a person's emotional reality without ever conceding a single millimeter of logical ground. Carnegie offered a masterstroke for navigating this exact delicate tension, providing a verbal formula that completely neutralizes hostility. I don't blame you one iota for feeling as you do. If I were you, I would undoubtedly feel exactly the same way. This statement is not a concession of factual defeat. It is a profound, unshakable acknowledgement of their humanity. You are simply validating their right to their own perspective, instantly draining the venom from any potential argument. Again, once you have validated their raw emotion and stabilized their ego, you deploy the quiet, devastating art of uh, tactical mirroring. Instead of hijacking the flow of the conversation with your own relatable story, a classic amateur mistake, you simply extract and repeat the last three critical words the person just said using an upward, deeply inquisitive vocal inflection. If they angrily state, I've just been under so much relentless pressure from the new executive team, you pause, maintain your warm, unflinching gaze, and quietly reply, the new executive team? This tiny three-word mirror acts as a psychological skeleton key. It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are listening with laser-like focus. But more importantly, it gently, irresistibly demands that they elaborate by weaving together the heavy vacuum of silence with the profound warmth of genuine interest and the surgical precision of tactical mirroring. You trigger a massive continuous release of dopamine in the speaker's brain. They begin to subconsciously associate this intense neurological high not with their own words, but entirely with you. You become a uniquely magnetic, almost addictive figure in their chaotic life. You are effortlessly steering the massive, heavy ship of the conversation using nothing but the absolute lightest touch of the rudder. Once the bridge of absolute psychological safety is established, the hypnotic listener shifts from deep observation to a phase of quiet, invisible orchestra. This is where listening transitions from a defensive shield into an active, precision guided weapon of influence. Most people believe that to guide a conversation toward a specific outcome, you must deliver a flawless, persuasive speech. But the human mind is naturally designed to resist external directives. The moment you tell someone what to do, what to think, or how to act, their psychological immune system kicks in. They look for flaws in your logic. They assert their independence and they dig their heels into their original position. The hypnotic listener understands a much deeper rule of human behavior. A person will fight to the death to defend an idea they believe they discovered themselves, but they will actively resist that exact same idea if it is forced upon them by someone else. Dale Carnegie encoded this profound psychological truth into one of his most brilliant principles of leadership: let the other person think the idea is theirs. In a high stakes conversation, you achieve this not by making statements, but by strategically planting ideas through the surgical execution of targeted open ended questions. You do not provide the answers, you provide the architectural framework that forces the other person's mind to find the exact answer you desire. You use their own words, their own stated values, and their own emotional drivers, all of which they handed to you during your periods of intense silence, and you mirror them back in a way that makes your ultimate goal look like the next logical step in their own evolution. You are essentially scripting their subconscious, allowing them to take the stage and deliver the exact lines you have quietly prepared for them. And to master this technique, you must banish all closed interrogative questions from your vocabulary. Questions that can be answered with a simple yes or no are transactional. They force the brain into an analytical state of compliance or defiance. Instead, the hypnotic listener utilizes calibrated questions that begin with how or what. These specific words trigger a phenomenon known as reverse brainstorming. When you ask a high ego client or an adversarial colleague, what do you think is the biggest obstacle preventing us from scaling this project right now? You are doing something incredibly subtle. You are explicitly validating their expertise and giving them a massive dose of importance. But simultaneously, you are forcing their brain to look in a very specific direction. You are controlling their cognitive focus. As they talk through the obstacle, they are unknowingly dismantling their own resistance, aligning their perspective with yours, and building the exact solution you wanted all along. Again, think about how the most masterful diplomats and corporate titans operate. They never corner an opponent by pointing out a flaw directly. Instead, they use a soft, inquisitive conversational hook. If they see a fatal error in a proposal, they might look at the presenter with deep, respectful attention and ask, how do you think the executive board will respond when they look at our budget margins for QSAN? This question doesn't trigger an argument because it isn't an attack. It is an invitation to collaborate. The presenter is forced to mentally simulate the future scenario, confront the flaw themselves, and propose the necessary correction. Because they formulated the correction, their ego remains entirely intact and they will pursue the new course of action with fierce, absolute dedication. You have completely rewritten their strategy without ever offering a single piece of direct criticism. Okay? This is the ultimate evolution of social intelligence. It requires a rare, near superhuman level of discipline. It means you must completely suppress your own natural desire to say, I told you so, or to claim credit for a brilliant insight. You must be entirely willing to let the other person take the spotlight and receive the applause and believe they are the mastermind of the operation. While their ego basks in the warmth of that public victory, you sit quietly in the shadows, holding the actual unshakable strings of power. You have won the long term psychological war by simply allowing them to win the short term verbal battle. You have mastered the rare art of steering human destiny from that background, proving that true power is never loud, never desperate, and never needs to boast. While their ego basks in the warmth of that public victory, you sit quietly in the shadows, holding the actual unshakable strings of power. When you have walked this path to its final destination, your entire understanding of human interaction undergoes a permanent, irreversible shift. You realize that the art of the hypnotic listener is not a collection of conversational tricks, a mechanical framework for negotiation, or a cynical method for extracting information. It is something infinitely more profound. It is the conscious, deliberate cultivation of absolute presence. In a world that is drowning in digital distractions, surface level connections, and a desperate, agonizing loneliness, a person who can provide unyielding, hyper focused attention becomes an oasis in a vast psychological desert. You cease to be a mere participant in a conversation. You become a rare and transformative force in the lives of everyone you encounter. Okay. This is the ultimate luminous peak of Dale Carnegie's philosophy. He did not write his masterworks so that we could navigate the world as cold, calculating observers, manipulating the human chessboard for petty, short term gains. He wrote them to show us that the deepest, most universal craving of the human soul is the desire to be truly seen, completely understood, and authentically valued. When you look past a person's defensive posturing, when you listen through their anger to find their fear, and when you meet their silent anxiety with a fortress of calm, empathetic validation, you are doing something transcendent. You are lifting the crushing weight of isolation from their shoulders. You are giving them the ultimate gift of significance, and in return, they will hand you their absolute loyalty, their unshakable trust, and their enduring respect. Miss, the true mastery of this discipline manifests when it becomes entirely effortless, when your silence is no longer a tactical calculation, but a natural reflection of your internal peace. Most people move through life in a state of perpetual emotional reactivity, constantly triggered by the words and opinions of others, always on the defensive, always fighting to protect their fragile self image. But the hypnotic listener stands on a foundation of absolute, unshakable confidence. Because you no longer need to beg the world for validation, because your own ego is entirely mastered, you possess the rare ability to absorb the emotional chaos of others without being infected by it. When a storm of anger or criticism breaks over you, you do not escalate the conflict. You meet the tempest with a steady, serene silence that forces the storm to burn itself out against your composure. You remain the unmoving center of the gravity well, holding the room together by the sheer force of your poise. You can, as you step back into the crowded, chaotic theater of your daily life, carry this silent power with you. Remember that every person you meet is fighting a fierce, invisible battle against their own insecurities, their own worries, and their own deep seated desire to matter. When you engage with them, resist the frantic, ego driven urge to perform, to boast, or to conquer them with your words. Instead, choose the higher plane of influence. Drop your shoulders, open your posture, clear your mind of distraction, and listen. Listen to the unspoken narratives, watch the fleeting micro expressions, respect the silent language of power, and guide the dynamic with the gentle, invisible touch of targeted curiosity. Connect. The rewards of this profound discipline are boundless. You will find that doors which once seemed permanently locked begin to swing open before you. Conversations that used to devolve into exhausting arguments will transform into elegant harmonies of cooperation. People who were once cold, distant, or adversarial will inexplicably soften in your presence, drawn to the magnetic sanctuary of your attention. You will command rooms without making demands, inspire absolute loyalty without exercising force, and shape the thoughts and actions of those around you without ever raising your voice. The world is a vast, beautifully complex symphony waiting to be understood. And the master conductor is the one who has finally learned how to listen. The world is a vast, beautifully complex symphony waiting to be understood. And the master conductor is the one who has finally learned how to listen